Hi there, it's Dr. JOYLYN Sparkles and welcome to your Power Hour. This is your time to what's on your mind, on my mind, and I will give you my 2 cents because that's what I like to do. And again, remember, we've got 2 settings, fire hose and comatose. That's about where we go. So I do have a tendency to talk fast and introduce new information at the end, so that's why it's good to stay all the way till the end. But welcome. I am so happy to have you here and to be here for you, where we're talking some real talk. There's no fluff, no bullshit with this. This is the stuff that is keeping us where we've been. Keep recreating what we've always had, and we're looking for something else. It's what I call going from stuck to happy as fuck, all right? It's a movement, it's a process, but we're breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, talking about the stuff that really comes up, what shadow work really is, and what light work really is, so that you know what the hell's going on, what to maybe expect, and to notice your progress, things like that. All right, let us dive in. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd. And if you will remember from last week, I talked about stupid questions. You know, let's rethink our questions. And talking about how we can direct our curiosity to get higher quality information and then make better, higher quality choices so that we can actually move up in our lives. And what those stupid questions are, because everybody says there's no such thing as a stupid question, and well, sort of, but there's what I call broken questions where we're asking things like, what's wrong with me? How could this get worse? What's not working here? Something to the effect of that. And that doesn't offer us, like, the universe will answer your question. So if you say, what's wrong with me? You're going to start seeing things that appear as evidence of something wrong, when in honesty there isn't. That's just a misleading question based on an inaccurate assumption. Now, the problem comes that when it comes to curiosity, curiosity actually stimulates the release of dopamine in your brain. Because we know dopamine as the reward neurotransmitter. It's the pleasure circuit. Well, we actually get pleasure and feel a reward in anticipation of that discovery. So that what it does is curiosity has this release of dopamine, and it's evolutionarily advantageous because that opens up learning centers. So we become open to new information and making new neural connections. Now, where that becomes disadvantageous is that we can likewise be rewarded in anticipation of finding out what's wrong with us. And that is where there can be dopamine release, where it can actually be rewarding to have these negative thoughts and asking these broken questions. Similarly, those of us all, because it's nearly universal, who've had trauma will also create a physiological change in the body. And it has a lot to do with, and a lot of different things are affected, but especially with the cortisol, to where cortisol, the stress, the fight or flight, that's going to get dumped into the system because it is going to keep you alive. It's going to open up your bronchioles and open up the airways. It's going to dilate the blood vessels, so more blood is getting to the heart, to the lungs, the muscles. And it's going to, dilate the pupils so that you're looking outside to see where the threat might be so that you are ready to run. So your fight or flight mechanism is charged. And that's a lot of it having epinephrine, norepinephrine, and, of course, cortisol. Now, the problem is that a lot of us have not had good modeling or training for how to bring that back down after the threat has been evaded. Also, the threat is largely imagined. Most of what we are reacting to and responding to with fight or flight is actually an imagined threat. It's not actually real. Our life is not actually in danger. Our survival is not in question. But our body is responding physiologically as if it is. Part of the reason is because a lot of that was going on when we were very, very small. And when we are small, we know that our survival is linked to other people being happy with us. Because to be banished would be basically to be left outside the tribe or the city walls and getting eaten by a bear, okay? And our little tiny little infant brain knows that our survival is linked to other people being pleased with us or us providing some benefit to them. This is all wired inside of us, okay? So that if you start picking up signals, this person's not pleased with me, they're mad at me, we learn how to shut ourselves down. But in that meantime, part of that is the cortisol loop of, ooh, I could die here because I could get left. I could get abandoned, and neglect and things will feel like that. Now, when that's happening really small and nobody is reassuring us then afterward, hey, it was because I was stressed. Hey, here's extra soothing to bring those chemicals down. We actually just start changing, and our baseline goes to where elevated stress hormones becomes the baseline. And so what happens with that is we just get used to being amped. So there's a lot of people who are type A or adrenaline junkies or caffeine junkies who actually just don't know how to self-regulate because they're just used to having that level of amplification in their system at all times. And if they don't, they feel depleted and down, when actually it could be a healthier baseline. Similarly, we will also then start to interpret emotional situations of peace and calm as boring or calm before the storm, still impending doom. And so these stress hormones and chemicals just never get back down to an adequate, healthy baseline. And so we just get used to them. That's our normal. And so that's what we're going to try to recreate because our subconscious has learned, well, I've gotten us alive. That's gotten us this far, so it'll keep us going indefinitely. So this is the way to keep it. We actually have to unlearn and relearn new ways of being and change our neurochemistry and our biophysiology. I think I'm making up new words. I don't know if biophysiology is really one, but it sounds good, right? Okay, anyway, so we've got to get some of these down because what happens is we become addicts. Like I said, if we're not getting that charge, if we're not getting that hit of dopamine, of knowing that I'm about to get a reward, we'll pick a fight. Because, hey, that's interesting, it's entertaining, there's some reward there, there's some charge. Oh, and I've got to have this level of cortisol, and if I don't, I really feel like I'm dragging ass, so I've got to get that in there. Yeah, let me scare myself. Let me add an additive like caffeine or something that'll boost that up. Let me drive too fast. Let me put things off to the last minute so that I can be in a supercharged rush so that I get those pumping again. And that's what I just love, you know. We get addicted to our own chemistry. Now that complexes because our chemistry will very then much start to drive our thoughts in that cybernetic loop. Our emotions will color our thoughts, and then our thoughts will determine our emotions. And it just keeps looping and swooping. And so it begins that we become addicted to our own emotions and thought patterns. To where the research is now saying at least 40% of our thoughts are habits. We don't even have to oh, I look fat today. I even noticed this in a conversation. I was talking about going somewhere tropical, and I was like, ooh, I'm a little bit nervous about being in a bathing suit. And I was like, wait, is that even true? I feel like I'm just supposed to say that. I'm a woman, so I should be a little bit insecure about my appearance in a bathing suit. And quite honestly, I'm not. I'm actually way more excited about getting into warm water in early or late spring, to where that's way more interesting. And I'm realistic about my age, to where I've done so much work on self-love. I was like, that actually isn't true for me, but it just came out of my mouth. And I was like, oh, we are programmed to think certain things. 40% or more of our thoughts are habitual. They are on automatic. And then you add to that, out of that, in addition to also happening at the same time, simultaneously, that's the word, 80% of our thoughts are negative. Because negative thinking does have a higher survival rating, about 5 to 1 or something like that, where a negative thought is more likely to keep you alive than just an imaginative, fun idea. So it's hardwired in us to gear negatively a little bit. And then 95% of our thoughts are repetitive. They are going and going and going, and a lot of us don't have, or are only beginning, or not good and don't try to notice our thoughts and see how repetitive they are. They are just going, and because they're repetitive, we actually take that as information that they're true. Like, I wouldn't be thinking this so often if it wasn't true. That is what's not true. I'm thinking them so often because I haven't practiced anything else is what's actually true. So we have a couple of cards stacked against us if we're actually interested in happiness and creating a future of generative, joyful, alive living. So how do you do this? One of the first things, and why stats are sort of helpful, is to get an understanding of this is the reality. A lot of what I'm thinking and feeling are habits. I don't even have to try. I've just been so practiced and rehearsed, it's almost like a script. And now even research is saying we tend to be negative thinkers. So instead of taking that on as an identity, like that's just something, I just a negative thing. I get a lot of people who are actually kind of proud of this. It's sadly more people than not. So our problems and our negative thinking is not what makes us unique and special. And then knowing that it's that repetitive, how many of us would like to be unique and special? How unique can you be if 95% of your thoughts are repetitive and you're thinking them every day, all the time? And that a whole lot of them, especially with, people in similar geographical areas, religious institutions, generational, years of living, that you're going to share those repetitive thoughts and program thoughts and habitual thoughts with a lot of other people. So if we really want to know who we are and what lights us up and what we came to bring to the world and be the gift of the world that we came to be, we've got to break out of this stuff. And the first thing to everything is to acknowledge what is true. I've got some emotional addiction going on. And it's not about shame. It's not about judgment. It's just to realize, wow. And this is true. This is a true story. I must really like to be disappointed because it happens a lot. I can find something good and be disappointed with the one little thing that wasn't there. Yes, part of it was trained. That's to be highly critical. That's very common in my family. And there is, in our reality, a bit of superiority in finding fault in other people. Like it somehow elevates you. It's backwards. It doesn't lift anyone up and no one feels better. But that's the environment that I grew up with. So that was what I did. And so that when I got married, it was very easy to find his faults and what was wrong with him. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel slightly more superior if I was willing to admit it. But then I had to start looking at, wow, I am really good and comfortable with being disappointed, unhappy, and lonely and feeling excluded. That was a big part of my story is this, for everyone else, this is the thing. They're loved, they're noticed, they're whatever. And then there's me. My specialness became because I was so unspecial or so damaged or something. And it just doesn't work. But not a lot can change if we're completely unwilling to say, this doesn't work for me. And just to say, yeah, I've got an emotional addiction, it is sort of embarrassing and humbling to be like, because it's, God, I didn't want to be like my mother, but look, I'm being my mother. Or my dad's like that all the time. I didn't want to be like that. Or heaven, I just ended up acting like my unhappy grandmother or like somebody. But our reference point, we became it, and now it's to recognize, okay, that's in my lap. So to know that you are an emotional addict is actually the first step in liberation, because you don't have to stay that way, because it is habit. And here's the thing about habit. Are you ready? Super good news. It's changeable. Yeah, this shit isn't written in stone. It just took a lot of practice. But now that we know more how the brain works and we know that this is what's going on, we can start inserting some mindfulness and use our conscious and superconscious awareness to start directing the subconscious in a new way to create a new habit. This is totally possible to where we can actually start shifting our default settings to happy, to more positive thinking. It's not to oppose the other, because that just creates an internal conflict. It won't work. It won't be sustainable. And just to say, no, that's not true. Your subconscious is the one, it's got so much rehearsal. It's like, yeah, this is true. We're going to die. You have to coax it out of that. You have to give it reassurance. You have to become the parent that perhaps you didn't have, or whatever calming and comforting agent that you needed that you didn't get then, but you can be now. And that's what starts to shift it. So we start to be aware, okay, I'm not super happy with my life. I'm not totally sure if I buy everything that she's talking about, but it makes a little bit of sense, so tell me more, JOYLYN. I will, happily. Okay. This emotional addiction is not a sign of weakness. It's not your fault, and judgment will do absolutely no good, okay? You just have to know that it's there and it's changeable. That's the good news. We're already starting off on a good foot. Hey, I don't have to stay this way, okay? So you acknowledge the truth or the likelihood that this is at least partially in effect. Then it's time for the real, what I call real talk. No bullshit, no fluff. You've got to get honest with yourself of, do you want it to change? Honestly. Because so many of us know we don't want what we have. We're just very, that's gross. But we don't have an idea of what we want. And when we do, we're kind of like, yeah, but not enough to really go for it. And so we have to, or just a lot of times, when it comes to these things, a lot of people talk about how much suffering, and when I suffered enough is when I turned it around, or when it got painful enough. It's actually what I find is when we get bored with it. When it stops to be entertaining, when it stops to have any kind of survival advantage and it's boring, we're much more likely to be like, okay, let's explore some other options. I'm bored with being poverty-stricken. I am bored with being depressed. I am bored with hating myself. I am bored with, and because we finally have gotten to a level where we've seen it happen so many times, we know things will change. We know it could be different, and we're finally actually willing to look at something different. And or a shortcut, so you don't have to continue running the experiment on repeat until you get bored. You can actually short circuit that and actually just start to get curious and ask good, healthy, empowering questions and get curious about what it is you do want. Because once you line up with something that you want more, the other thing stops being so entertaining. So that if we're getting, and it always has a secondary payoff. So whatever this is that we do, that we're saying, it's horrible, I know I overthink, I know I'm a negative thinker, oh, I know I go into overwhelm, oh, I know I procrastinate, oh, I know I do this, I know I do this. It has a secondary payoff. One of them is somewhere in there it's wired that it's keeping you alive. Okay, we'll just have to know that. But some of us get attention that way. We have social connection through that. We sometimes just don't know any other way to be, so it's functional. But if we start directing our curiosity into what else is possible, we'll start noticing people do things in a different way than us, but instead of it being triggering, we'll actually be like, oh, I wonder if I could do that. Because we'll have taken control of our curiosity. I wonder what it's like to have that. I wonder if I could do that. And then we start getting dopamine and reward and pleasure from actually thinking more empowering thoughts. Huge shortcut. Then, also knowing that from there, whatever it is, the work that has to be done, no matter what ad you read on Facebook or anywhere, you're going to have to do it more than once. Even the habit that you are struggling with so much, even though it seems like it has always been there, it also took repetition to solidify to what it is today. The benefit that it had was probably trauma or theta brain patterning, early childhood patterning, to where it got in there easier. There wasn't an analytical filter that said, I don't think that's going to work. It was just like, this is how it works. Because of those things, it had that. But then you still had to repeat and operate based on whatever that pattern was. What you can do, because you don't really want to re-traumatize yourself, to put in a positive thought. It's probably not going to work really well. I'm actually just thinking about that, and it's sort of funny. It's so fucking backwards, but I'm not going to do it, and please don't. You can start to work on another workaround then, is to start working on your mindfulness, your relaxation abilities, to start changing your brainwave chemistry or your brainwave patterns so that you can more easily become more suggestible. And then because you know your brain likes to think and 95% of your thoughts are repetitive, that's because the brain likes to brain. It just does what it does. It thinks. It thinks thoughts. That's what the brain does. And it thinks the same ones because then it doesn't have to come up with new ones. That you start suggesting more positive thoughts, questions, things to think on, and you start repeating those, that will start to become your repetitive pattern. Ooh, I wonder how I could get better than this. Oh, I wonder what gift this is to me. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder how this is going to work out in my favor. Those are now the questions that start coming up even as bad shit's happening. Even sometimes I put up a meme, I'll do it again here probably in the next week or two. I think it was Elvis that said, when things go wrong, don't go with it. And now that thought somehow has stuck with me to where I'm like, wow, things look like they're going to hell in a handbasket, don't go with it. Jump out of the handbasket, okay? You don't have to. No matter what has happened previously, you aren't condemned to it. So change the thoughts that you're thinking. And one of the ways to do that is to start practicing slowing down so that you can become more suggestible and offer yourself more empowering questions and thoughts. And you're going to have to do that more than once because you're not just going to go to one relaxation session, acupuncture session, hypnotherapy session. Even in hypnotherapy, you have to go more than once because it's just generally that there is no one and done because we're actually rewiring the nervous system. The nervous system, trauma recovery, all of them take repetitive instances. That's how trust is built. Everything about our humanity comes from repetitive exposures. So it's going to be done more than once. So if it takes you a bunch of times, it's not because you're stupid or slow. It's because that's how we are wired, and that's how it's designed, okay? Taking a small breath. When it comes to what is this work, it is what I call the slow down to speed up, to start getting curious about what is it that you do want. We know what we don't want, but that's not enough to carry forward or create any change. What is it that we do want? What's the outcome we would like to have? What's the emotional milieu and biochemistry that we'd like to be feeling? What are the thoughts and feelings I'd like to be having on a day-to-day basis? How do I want to show up? If I see myself as a negative overthinker, devil's advocate and I have a lot of people who know that they're super intelligent, but they kind of get in their way. If that's who I know myself as, how would I like to be instead? Because a lot of us who grew up and really thrived in academics do sometimes notice that we get a little hesitant to try new things because we don't want to be bad at them, but the people who are willing to be really bad at them seem to be having more fun. So then be like, okay, I want to show up as more fun. You start getting curious about what it is that you do want. Then start practicing slowing down, because in any situation, in any other tool that you use, that slow down is actually the first thing that's going to allow you to know, I have another tool I can use. Here's how I get out of reaction. I have this small pause. So even when things are good, you start practicing, hey, let me take a deep breath. I don't need one, but I'm just going to practice being conscious of myself. That's one thing you can do to also accelerate this process. And then the work that comes thereafter is the noticing the thoughts, seeing how repetitive they are, seeing how negative they are, watching them and not reacting, not judging them. And that isn't easy. It is only badasses who actually are even willing to take the call and try to do that. Because these thoughts do come so fast, so often, that the first couple times that you do them, it's like, this is a losing game. I'm never going to get this way. I'm never going to be able to change this. It's just so so hot, so heavy, so fast and furious. Like, how am I ever going to get a handle on these thoughts to think different? Especially if I'm already 50, 60, 70 years old and I've been thinking these for so long. You can. It's totally possible. I'm already giving you shortcuts. Watch this again so you can get them. But what's going to come up then is a lot of emotional regulation. Learning how to handle the emotional intensity that comes in the face of perceived failure, of overwhelm, of just some things are going to be dislodged as your chemistry changes, as you think different thoughts. Some of these old ones are going to come up to be released out of the system, but in the meantime, it's going to have a big charge. A lot of us have believed for so long in our worthlessness and our badness that when that comes up, it feels so real and it feels so heavy and it's so painful. We need to actually have tools to learn how to soothe ourselves because our brain's on fire. So emotional regulation, learning, that's a skill. And some people are just born better than others in certain areas of their life, but these are all actually skills. They're all learned. Even these thoughts that we're dealing with were learned. So we can unlearn them and relearn new skills. Okay, that's why this whole system is flexible, changeable, and this is the good news. But learning emotional handling skills. Learning nervous system recalibration, so changing your mindset. Having conversations of a different caliber. That's where a lot of therapy and having a coach and specific journaling exercises will help, is to change our mindset, to become aware of what we've been telling ourselves and insert a new program. We're going to have to actually have embodiment practice because our body is the subconscious that's holding all of this in place for us. That's its job. It's like the little black box in the airplane that tells us this is all that's ever happened to me ever. And we're saying, okay, that did happen, it's truth, but we need to let it go so something new can be in there, and we can't do it all in our head. We can't just sit in a chair and feel our feelings and think. We have to move. Emotions are those connectors between thoughts and our bodies to the embodiment, to where it's trying to get us to move. That's where I talk about dancing, singing, things that are actually going to engage the body and move that energetic charge through our body and out so that it doesn't get lodged in there and be the fuel for these negative repetitive thoughts. So there's going to have to be some sort of movement, actual physical movement. When it comes to that, anything that's going to highlight mindfulness, so sometimes things like Tai Chi and yoga are better because they're a little bit slower, whereas running, and even though I like it, running can discharge some things if you've got a big charge, but because of the repetitive nature, it doesn't always break that loop. So keep that in mind. There are specific choices that will help sometimes, not others. So it's picking the right movement for the situation. And then it also, because movement is going to stimulate the metabolism, increase our body temperature, it's actually going to help increase the metabolism of these things so they actually get processed and aren't just, getting moved into circulation and then moving to other places and staying. Okay, so the movement has kind of a twofold process. It's actually giving expression to the feeling, letting us complete whatever fight or flight it was, bringing some mindfulness to the situation, engaging different parts of our brain so that we can process if it was a trauma, and then also picking up the metabolism so you can actually metabolize it and get it out of the system. Then there's also going to be in this process, because it didn't happen in a vacuum, we don't live in a vacuum, meaning there are other people on this planet that we have to engage in. There's going to have to be parts of this process and the work that engage and learn new ways of being with ourselves and other people, because we often forget that we're a person that we're with all the time. And we've been talking really mean and nasty to ourselves for a long time. We actually have to learn how to be different with ourselves and our bodies. And what I also love is to bring in the soul. There's actually sort of like a trinity within us, the me, myself, and I, and getting a conversation going between all parts for really optimal health. But then we are going to have to start learning how to talk to other people, to have boundaries, to apologize, to express love in a way that's not leaving them guessing, to where we can actually have safety and vulnerability so we can actually have the connection that's actually really nurturing for us all, that allows for an even greater expression of love on the planet. It's really the gift of humanity is we came to be here with other people. And we have to learn how to do that in healthy ways. So those are the things that come into the work once we've actually recognized that we have an emotional addiction, that our thoughts are way too repetitive for our own good and probably too negative. And if we're actually aware, I would truly like something different, and or both, I'm bored as fuck with what I've created with this since the beginning of time that I can remember. So I'd actually just like something different. This is what you're going to have to do, is learn how to emotionally regulate, recalibrate your nervous system, and reprogram your mindset. Start with some embodiment practices. Get your body into this dialogue, conversation, and healing. And then start working with different ways of communication and learning energetics to be with yourself and other people in a more healthy way. I would love to be part of this journey with you, because these are the conversations that I like to have. This is the work that I enjoy doing for myself and for other people, is helping people reconnect with themselves, build on self-love, boost their self-esteem, correct shitty communication patterns so they can be thinking happier thoughts, feeling more elevated emotions, having healthier relationships so that we become ripple effects of loving, happy expressions of aliveness. And then being able to be such a lit up, self-assured, confident, and powerful expression that is the gift that you be to the world. And I love being part of that. So please, let me be. Let's talk. You can either get onto the website, ihappentothings.com. You can go to the services page to see all the programs that are outlined, or just direct message me. Just message me or email me, and let's set up a time to talk to see what possibilities, programs are going to be the best fit for working together, because I love this. And I love you already, because I know you're a badass, even for just watching this and being curious about a different way of being. And I know what you're up against. I have lived it, and I have found some really good shortcuts, and also found where sometimes where we become most resistant to the work and want to give up the most is when we're closest to the breakthrough, and sometimes you just need somebody to tell you that. It's always nice to have an ally in your corner, and I would love to be that for you. Let's talk. And until then, know that you are loved. Get curious about what it is you want and how you want to show up and how things can get better. And then get your butt back here, and I will see you next week for another episode of Power Hour. Love you much. Mwah.